Hello, good day. Okay, so today we're not going to bother with lengthy introductions. Instead, today I shall just provide you with the obvious knowledge that today I shall be attempting to draft and reconstruct an 1890s waistcoat according to the instructions outlined in the 1895 Keystone Guide to Jacket and Dress Cutting, which I shall link down below if you wish to follow along at home, although I must continually remind the internet that I am not in the business of providing tutorials, as believe it or not, there is no such thing as truth in this murky and uncertain business of history. Anyway, okay, so for the pattern for this, I am going back to my old friend, Mr. Keystone. I don't think that's actually his real name. I am maybe a little bit daunted by this. This is slightly more complicated than a skirt. It's a lot less straight lines and a lot more things that actually need to fit in certain places. There are lots of instructions, so hopefully I will just be able to follow these step by step, draw the appropriate lines, and get something that's sort of like a waistcoat. It's probably easier said than done, but we're gonna give it a go. So these instructions are to draft something sort of akin to this, which will translate into this set of given measurements. The waist size is fine for me. It matches my waist size, which is really cool. I have the sense that it's going to be a little bit short-waisted because I'm a little bit longer waisted. I'm not a 36-inch bust. Even with the padding on the corset, I'm not a 36-inch bust. So this is going to be an adventure. These are technically then the ideal late 19th century measurements. So what I think I'm going to do is I'm not going to alter the pattern at all. Obviously, if this pattern would come out too small, it would be something that I would have to probably think about doing alterations for whilst I'm doing this. I think I should mention that this drafting system, this book, in the beginning he has this whole sort of series of drafting systems for essentially a sloper for the upper body, the waist, and he goes through and sort of illustrates the drafting system for all body types, whether you are thin, whether you are larger, whether you are stooping, so all different sorts of postures and body types. So don't be discouraged if you are not this Victorian measure. This is just, I guess, the sort of standard. And of course he also advises, you know, for larger figures you put more darts in different places. So there are sort of options for different body types out there. Okay, so this draft is proving a little bit more complicated only because he's not necessarily giving you every single instruction. So I think there's going to be a little bit of conjecturing going on here on my part. What I'm just looking at right now is I'm working on this bit here. I don't know if this is going to make any sense to you here since you're not technically following along step by step, but essentially he's not really giving me these distances to this point, so I'm not entirely sure. He's telling me to round off the arm side, but I don't know where it's supposed to come up to. So I guess this is something that I'm going to just make up. I went back and I had a look because in the beginning of the book there is also a series of drafts, again like I said, for basic standard waist, so I thought maybe it's just a super basic thing that he addressed in the beginning, but no. So yeah, this is something that I'm just gonna have to make up. In theory this distance from here to here should be, oh, the outside shoulder, which maybe I can actually take the measurement for. Okay, I'm getting a rough estimate of 5 inches. I'm doing this on myself, so I'm not entirely sure how accurate that is. If this is 5 inches, that would put 0.3 around here, which actually looks about right. We're gonna go ahead with that, which means that this point should match up round this way, maybe? Oh, he has me do X first, which looks about halfway between. So here's this point. I mean, there will be mock-ups. We shall see how this goes. Okay, so this is very non-linear and very confusing, but now he's having me do this whole bit up here where we figure this out, which doesn't really make sense because he wanted me to draw this arm's eye thing way before and I didn't know what points to connect to them to, which is strange. But I guess we'll now take care of this and then go back and see if this is correct. I didn't say this earlier, but at some point, again, later on, he had me go in and then put this 0.12 here, so I had to move this arm's eye from, because I had it ending sort of around here, and then it ended up having me put 0.12 here, so I had to move it over a little bit. So yeah, it's a little bit out of order. So if you are attempting this pattern, or if you are attempting other Keystone patterns that maybe are also written like this, we will obviously see what the overcoat has to do, but this skirt was fairly straightforward. None of all this non-linear nonsense. But yes, so if you are attempting a Keystone pattern and you are confused because you are wondering how you get a point out of nowhere, it's probably somewhere later in the instructions. Okay, so according to the instructions, I did
exactly what I'm supposed to do. So yay for figuring things out in unconventional ways, but also yay for instructions.
Okay, so here's where I am so far. I've got the actual waist part drafted, all the darts in, all the actual pieces present. What I haven't done is I have not yet put the collar bit on. That is actually on the diagram on the other side of this page that I was referencing, and I didn't see it. So I was like, where's the collar? There is a whole other page in the book full of different collar lapel options, so I thought I would have to go back and look at that, print that out, because I hadn't done so, but it turns out that the collar instructions are just right here, so I'm going to go proceed and do that. I'm running out of light, so I might not film it. I may do it in the wee hours this evening and then come back tomorrow morning and start cutting this out. So I'm going to go draft a collar, and I shall see you soon. Okay, so I have completed the mock-up for the waistcoat. I got absolutely no footage of the editing, fitting process for this, which I kind of severely regret because I feel like, well, you know what, it's always a bit of an existential crisis with this because I thoroughly have no clue what I'm doing when I'm fitting these mock-ups, and in a way I feel like it's sort of setting a bad example for people who don't necessarily have much experience in this to sort of see me flailing about not really knowing what I'm doing with this. But at the same time, I mean, I guess if you don't have any clue what you're doing, maybe it's good to start somewhere. I don't know. The point is, I have completed this mock-up. It was a journey. Obviously, it did not fit me whatsoever in the bust, in this whole top chest area. And I did leave a little bit of room because I do intend to put some padding up here, just in this upper shoulder area, because that's the historical thing to do. I did fit this to my waist, which I ended up having to let out just a little bit. I'm also not entirely sure if this is correct. I ended up adding a little gore to the hip area to give it a little bit more spring because that's what it does on me. It just made this side area sit a little bit nicer. I'm quite happy with how this fits and how it sits. So after a lot of fitting and altering and cutting and refitting and altering and refitting and altering, we are now ready to move forth. I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and, well, I have to split this all apart and get the pattern pieces and make the alterations to my actual pattern so that I can cut out this proper fitting shape. So first I need to transfer all of the alterations I made on my mock-up to my pattern so that I can actually cut out the correct shapes this time. I'm doing this by marking any changed seams, then cutting the shapes apart without seam allowance. I can then lay these net muslin pieces on top of my old pattern, mark the new lines, then cut the pieces to shape. I'm going to be making up the waistcoat out of this wool check that you may recognize from our Garment District adventure. It's also the fabric I used for the walking skirt, so I'm very much looking forward to having a nice matchy, tweedy ensemble. The pieces are laid onto the fabric warp-wise. I actually just came across an interesting line in Bertha Banner's Household Sewing with Home Dressmaking, where she mentioned that the warp or selvage length of the fabric should always be running lengthwise on the body, since it's the stronger grain of the fabric. So the selvage edge of the fabric will be running parallel up and down the length of the waistcoat, with the center front edge on the straight grain, and I'm just marking everything out with some Tailor's chalk. Likewise, the center back is also placed on the straight grain. Normally, this is indeed straight, but as we are all probably well familiar with my spinal grievances by now, I had to make some minor adjustments to that center back line on the mock-up to get it to fit properly. Don't ask how I did this on myself. There may or may not have been witchcraft involved. I'm also cutting a facing piece for the lapel out of the wool check, since the lapel turns outwards and you'll see the inside as the outside. I've gotten this pattern piece by tracing off that lapel bit from my front panel pattern, and included about the first inch of width all the way down the center front edge. This will also help to strengthen the edges where the buttons and buttonholes will be, and will help to finish off those front edges neatly. I'm also cutting out the front panel and front facing pieces out of some Tailor's canvas, which will help to give the front of the waistcoat some nice structure. I'm cutting out both pieces here, but at this point I wasn't actually sure where and how many layers of canvas I should be adding, so I decided to cut it all and experiment with it later. Finally, I'm also marking out the front and back pieces on this brown cotton silesia, which is basically a glazed cotton and was commonly used for waistcoat and coat linings in the 19th century. At last, I can now cut out all of my traced pieces. So I have got all of my pieces cut out. I have got a front and a back of this cotton silesia. I've got a facing and a front of this hair canvas. What I've actually done is I've gone ahead and I've cut out the full shape out of the canvas. I don't need this much. I really only need, I mean, probably just about this facing amount just on the front here. So I will go through and trim this off at some point. I just wasn't sure how much I needed whilst I was cutting it, so I just cut the whole thing, which was probably not a very historically accurate thing to do because they would not have wasted this much material, but you know what? Cabbage is cool. We can always use this for something anything else. So what I will be doing is I will probably go ahead and I will trim this up to about the dart, because I don't think I want to have any of this canvas adding bulk to the waist at this dart point. So I will probably cut it to about here. I don't know if I'm going to go all the way up to the dart or not. I don't know yet. I feel like this whole process is just me sort of guessing as to what I'm doing just before I actually do it, because tailoring is a thing I have admired greatly from a distance but have yet to actually attempt myself. So I feel like a lot of these techniques are things that I know in theory, or things that I've seen done places but have never actually implemented myself. So this is going to be a bit of an adventure. So yes, definitely the beginning of a long and exciting historical tailoring journey, but here is where we are starting. So I also have one of every piece cut out in this wool tweed. So I've got a back, I've got a facing for the lapel, and I've got the front. So my first step for this is I'm going to go through and just thread mark all of these top pieces, because all of these top pieces will get interlined with this canvas and I will lose all of my chalk lines. So what I'm going to do first is I'm just going to go through and I'm going to thread mark the outer lines as well as the darts on all of these top pieces, and then I think we go ahead with the pad stitching and the basting of the interlining into the actual thing. Once that's been done, I'm starting off by getting all of the darts stitched in. There are obviously 2 on either side of the front pieces, but there are also 2 very small darts on either side of the back. So these are pinned out of both the wool layers and the lining layers, then stitched. Okay, so I have just laid my canvas piece on top of the front piece, which has its darts in it now, just to sort of try and get a sense of vaguely where I want this to go. I know I cut a full piece, which I don't technically necessarily need, and then I was hypothetically going to chop it just right here, probably up to this first dart. However, the wool that I'm using is very, very drapey. I'm not entirely sure if this is going to be too light for a waistcoat, and if I should just interline the entire thing with the canvas, if that will help, or if that's just going to create too much bulk. I think it will be okay. What I think I may do is I may chop the canvas sort of here and then have it come down to just the edge of this dart here. That way the front of it will be stabilized up through, you know, it'll hold these darts out hopefully a little bit, and then we'll create less bulk over here on this waist area. So I think that is what I'm going to attempt to do. Otherwise, I think this is coming together a little bit more quickly than I anticipated, which is really good. So I'm gonna see how far we can get now. So after pinning the canvas layer in place, I'm then going through and basting it down, doing my best to keep it held in the 3-dimensional shape it wants to live in now that the darts are in, rather than forcing it to lie flat. This way, hopefully it'll want to sit more naturally against the 3-dimensional shape of the body. I'm then holding these dart edges together with a herringbone stitch, or as it's referred to in ye old 21st century, a cross stitch. That done, I can now proceed to actually put the waistcoat together. It's only a center back seam and 2 side seams for both the wool and the lining layers, so this won't take a minute. I should probably have noted that when I was basting down the canvas layer earlier, I did not baste down the lapel area because this gets pad stitched separately. Not a temporary basting pad stitch as we've been doing thus far, but a permanent one, which means that the stitches are much smaller, neater, and done in a black thread that won't be visible from the wool side of the fabric. The process of pad stitching the lapel not only secures the canvas and fabric layers firmly together, but allows you to carefully sculpt the 2 layers into shape so that the lapel actually wants to roll back against the waistcoat instead of flopping forward. To do this, I'm gently rolling the fabric around my index finger just at that break line, or the line where the lapel edge will fold back, to mold it into that turned back position. I actually had posted a picture of this on my Instagram a while back when I was working on it, and got a couple of really interesting questions about the pad stitching process, so hopefully this answers things a bit. I actually think it's really cool how we can sort of have a bit of an interaction when I'm actually posting the pictures in real time, since it's a little bit unfortunate that with the videos you only get to respond after the project has been completed and documented. So I guess let it be known now that I'm going to start posting some more real-time progress shots over on the Instagram, and I'm going to make an effort to look at your questions or bits of intrigue in the comments so that I can properly address them in the videos, because community and sharing knowledge and learning stuff, it's all really cool. Anyway, once my lapels are all ready to go, I can then go ahead and stitch together the shoulder seams as well as the little center back seam on the collar so that it becomes one continuous piece that I can stitch down to the back neck edge of the waistcoat. And the seam allowances of these little inner curves must be clipped in order for this to happen, or basically it will not cooperate. I have also gone ahead and stitched the little center back collar seam on the facing pieces so that I can now go ahead and get these attached. The facing gets pinned onto the center front and the neck edges of the waistcoat with right sides together. I'm then just trimming back the seam allowances to about 1/4 inch so that there's a bit less bulk when I turn the layers. Now before I put the lining in, I'm just going to quickly add a bit of padding into the shoulder area so that the lining can conceal the padding and hold everything neatly into place. This is history's great secret for amazing silhouettes. A bit of padding is added to that hollow bit between the shoulder and the bust to make everything sit smoothly and avoid that little crumply spot by the shoulder if you, like most people, don't naturally have a chest shaped like this. This is seen everywhere in the 19th century, in dresses, bodices, coats, so of course I am really eager to experiment with this in my waistcoat endeavors. I have already roughly determined the shapes needed for my particular padding requirements in a fitting, so I'm just duplicating those shapes to put into both sides. You'll want to use several slim layers of sheet cotton wadding and stagger them so that the edge of the padding isn't too extreme and noticeable from the outside. This is then pad stitched into place with the long stitches, catching only the canvas layer interlining and not going through to the wool layer on the outside, since these are not temporary stitches and will need to be left in. With that done, I can now go ahead and get the lining in. This I'm just securing into place with lots and lots of pins to ensure that everything is positioned appropriately, then turning under the raw edges of both the lining and fabric layers on all sides. The facing pieces, however, fold over top of the center front edge of the lining layer. Everything is then secured into place by hand with tiny felling stitches. At this point, everything is secure enough that I can go ahead and remove all of my temporary basting stitches. Next, the center front and lapel edges of the waistcoat are top stitched by hand with small running stitches to ensure that the edges are held very crisp and flat. And then it's time for buttonholes. I seem to have forgotten to record my marking out of these, but there are 6 buttonholes placed 1.5 inches apart here, with the buttonholes worked by hand in black silk twist. The buttons are just these little enameled ones that I picked up in the garment district, and these get stitched on quickly in their respective positions. It should be noted that I completely accidentally positioned the closure in the men's fashion, that is left-hand side over right-hand side as opposed to vice versa, but I'm not at all mad about this, and in fact I think it was very much a happy accident. Also, whoever needed gender norms anyway? Now there's just one more thing that I want to do before I call this waistcoat complete, and that is to put some little stays behind the 2 darts at the front. This was quite common practice for bodices and even blouses to keep a nice rigidity to the front, even on top of the corset. I do plan to actually wear this waistcoat without a corset, so I think having the stays in front will still help to give it that subtly 19th century shape, even in an everyday dressing situation. So I have 4 synthetic baleen bones left over from my corset project that will be perfect use for this, and I'm just pinning them on inside some casings made from the remaining leftover deerstalker ribbon. I must confess that the stay casings would probably not have been made from Petersham like I'm using here. They likely would have been done with a narrow twill tape, but I couldn't be bothered to go out and buy some and thought I'd just use up what I had left in my stash, which is my feeble claim to historical attitude, if not necessarily historical practice. The casings are felled down on both sides to secure them into place, as this is how it appears to have been done on the 2 19th century bodices and blouse in my own collection. And thus the waistcoat is complete. This project has thoroughly solidified my obsession with historical tailoring, although it does require lots and lots and lots of skill and practice in order to get just right and beautifully clean, and I haven't quite gotten there yet, but this project was still so satisfying to work on. I love the precision and technique involved in tailoring, and I do think that the waistcoat came out nice enough to wear regularly in everyday dress. I definitely plan to continue experimenting with making some more waistcoats and tailoring in general, because I think it's a skill that forces you to start looking at your sewing and your skills and crafts generally with a more detailed and strategic eye, which I think can be wholly beneficial. The main thing I wish I'd done differently for this project is I really wish I had put in a watch pocket. I didn't think to, since I put a watch pocket into the matching skirt, but I sort of severely regret this decision. I mean, how amazing would this look with the happy addition of a little watch chain? But I suppose this is an endeavor to be explored for next time. And with that, I shall thank you for joining me on this process, and I wish you luck should you now be off on your own historical tailoring adventures.